Welcome back to Beagle Eye Visions. I can't talk much because it's a long episode. We're going to wrap up episode 55, Green Language of the Birds. Here we go. Let's get some knowledge. Thank you for made it this far.
But if you're wondering what happened once I tried to share this information about this cartoon in this way, let's just put it this way. It wasn't received well. And all the times, every time I've done that. I mean, not with my open-minded friends and family, but with those specific people who are very closed off to that type of information. Now let's go ahead and get back to the birds. And let's think about something very sacred about a bird that helps allow most of them to defy the law of gravity and fly, from the earth and fly around. Well, what would that be? It'd be a feather, right? Or feathers. You can't just have one feather. You gotta have many feathers. But the point is to think about it symbolically. Okay? And now I'm going to move on to slide number 11 that says language of the birds, feather symbolism. So think about all the indigenous tribes that used feathers in their headdresses, which is really important to pay attention to when trying to understand the Native Americans of North America and ancient Egypt with the Egyptian gods and goddesses who wore a feather in their headdresses like Ma'at, because it's a language of the birds. And pretty much everywhere in the world, feathers were also believed to be equipped with magical powers, which would increase for the individual who wore a ritual dress who used elements adorned in feathers. And feathers have decorated medicine bundles and ceremonial rattles and drums and staffs and war bonnets and helmets and crowns. And what it represented was an altered state of consciousness described as a flight between Earth and the spiritual world or heaven. So when we think of gravitation, we know that this is a law of the material world, right? Which is the impulse towards the center of materiality. And one of the important laws in the spiritual world is levitation. And levitation being the impulse toward the center of spirituality. So levitating like a bird in consciousness, okay? So think about how birds are able to raise closer to the sun, to the light, right? So think about that. Use your imagination. You think about birds rising because they're the only beings that can raise off the ground and defy gravity and move towards the sun. And they fly like the sun going across the day sky.
If you don't mind,
okay?
Talk shop for now.
And they do this because they have these feathers, which is likened to a magical power. So a feather is really important when looking into and trying to understand the language of the birds, because there are so many of the qualities that we associate with birds that are distilled in the image of a single feather, like lightness and mobility and air and wingedness and balance and flight and joy. And I would say most importantly, freedom, okay? So part of the magic of feathers is that they're unique to birds. the most heavenly of creatures. And they're thought to have evolved from the scales of primordial reptiles, attesting to the unity of heaven and earth. And supposedly, there were feathered prehistoric reptiles that originated flight, just as the mythically Mayan feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, which combined the sacred elements of bird and snake. And then if you've seen the movie King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, then there's a scene in there, I think it's only like 3 seconds long, but it's really awesome, where I believe it's a giant eagle or hawk, I could be wrong, but it's one of those big birds, and it grabs a snake in its talons and then takes flight. And there's also a big pillar in that scene that's raised, and when that bird is taking flight with that snake, simultaneously King Arthur is being raised in consciousness to be able to see and understand truth. He's getting closer to truth. He has raised himself and taking on responsibility to truth and to serve truth. And that's why he's able to pull the sword from the stone, because that's about taking the responsibility. And that snake is akin to the R complex, the reptile part of the brain, which is associated with ego. And then the bird over the snake and having control over the snake and flying is about our consciousness being raised and having control over the ego. Okay? So then that's what King Arthur is about. King Arthur is about raising consciousness over the ego, raising the spirit over the material, and being able to be raised in consciousness, because that's what it's about. So there's a lot more to that, but if you haven't seen King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, you definitely need to see that. That is one of the greatest King Arthur movies that I've ever seen, and I feel like they did such a great job with the allegory, especially. Now, I'm going to move on to slide number 12 with the heart and feather on the scales, the language of the birds, feather symbolism. Now, in ancient Egypt, the ostrich feather was the higher glyph of Ma'at, goddess of right order and truth and justice, who also was winged like a bird, right? And in later dynastic times, it was thought that the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather. So depending on the results, the dead were either allowed to enter the land of the blessed, or they were swallowed into this, big black hole, big void. And what this suggests is that one with the heart that lived life balanced should be light as a feather to be able to pass through into the afterlife. Now, I believe the reason why green language and the language of the birds are the same language is because it comes down to judgment, meaning that one who uses green language morally judges the words phonetically and then comes to an understanding of what the words are actually saying with a moral description or understanding, okay? And then the language of the birds is about understanding the heart weighed against the feather as a form of judgment for whether one's scales are unbalanced or balanced, with the heart being as light as a feather, to be able to pass on to the afterlife. because that's what the second degree is about. It's about being passed, because it's about raising ourselves up to the level where we can pass. So the heart, like I said, is the ear in the middle as a symbol of time and attention, and the feather is what measures that time and attention to make the student light enough to pass. Okay? So it's a language of the birds, because for the obvious that it's a feather and it's light, and it's about whether the heart has become light from darkness and heaviness of the material physical realm. And green it's about a middle balanced frequency. So to have the scales balanced is to have the green frequency, to be able to listen with balance, and to hear with balance, and to see with balance, which is about the heart, because the Anahata heart chakra, the green heart chakra, is in the middle, which is about balance. Green is in the middle of the visible spectrum, okay? Now we're going to go a little deeper with the language of the birds in ancient Egypt, okay? Especially in regards to the ancient Egyptian mythos. So we're going to go to slide number 13 that says, language of the birds. We have to understand that bird-headed deities in ancient Egyptian art symbolize the spiritual side of human nature. I'm going to say that again because I really want to emphasize this, because this is what I think really needs to be understood very deeply to really grasp what these gods actually are, okay? So bird-headed deities in ancient Egyptian art symbolize the spiritual side of human nature. That is very, very important to understand, okay? So green language, or the language of the birds, is very, very powerful to understand when trying to reconcile the Egyptian mythos with Horus and Set and Ra and Thoth and, any gods as birds, or gods with wings, or gods with feathers on their heads like Ma'at, or any gods with bird-like attributes, because it's about understanding the mythology. And birds and their feathers are light in weight, but light in weight is interchangeable or akin to light being the visible light or consciousness, because the lower the weight, the less of a gravitational pull, right? And this is analogous to Horus, the bird-headed god who is associated with the sun, the light, or the sun which seemingly flies across our day sky every day from the perspective of Earth. And this is why the Egyptians had a sun disk, which is light, or a sun in the middle of two wings. And this is also why green language, or the language of the birds, is also referred to as the language of light, or the art of light, because it's a higher language. It's a language of higher frequency and higher evolution, because the sun is above, the light is above, the birds are above. So higher language, we have to think in terms of height, that we can understand by understanding the height of the flight of birds and the sun, because the sun is high, the birds are high, so it's a high language. It's a high frequency. And Horus is really, really important to understand when trying to understand green language, because we have to understand that when we're looking at the Earth and the equator of the Earth, then we'll be able to see that for the most part, and for the reason of the equator, the sun travels from east to west around the equator from the perspective of being on Earth. And we have the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere, and then the equator between the two. So the sun seemingly being in the middle of the two hemispheres is akin to the balanced light of the two hemispheres of the human brain. Okay, so we have to stay oriented. So human brain, meaning the both hemispheres, the right and left hemisphere, being the sacred feminine on the right, the sacred masculine on the left, and the right hemisphere of the human brain being associated with the southern hemisphere of the earth, and the northern hemisphere of the earth being associated or corresponding to the left hemisphere of the human brain, right? So we really have to use our imagination to be able to see that science, because it's a science. And then you think of, well, you know, where is the most vegetation in this world as far as what we can eat and, you know, what is good for us and where humans can thrive the most? Well, it's the equator. It's where we get lots of nutrients from the sun and from green vegetation. So to be balanced within, having both hemispheres aligned, having an alchemical wedding, having our heart and mind in a balance, well, this is what allows for green language, or the language of the birds, to resonate with us, to help us, because it's about the light above, and it's about the green in the middle. So it's very, very important that we use our imagination to see the correspondences, okay? Now, birds are referred to as spirit guides in many cultures, recent and ancient. And this makes sense when you really look at the physical world of birds in correspondence with the spiritual realm of the mind. It's about corresponding our imagination and soul to the bird's eye view. And you can look at it as, you know, the saying, free as a bird is akin to free spirit. So if a bird is a spirit, or referred to as a spirit, then we can think of the saying, the bird is the word. And words are spirits, and spirits are words. And the spirit speaks through birds, aka the birds of the ancient Egyptian solar and lunar and stellar mythos.
I'll take a look, sure.
Like Horus the hawk, or Thoth the ibis, or Set the blackbird, and any other gods with bird-like attributes or characteristics. And, you know, when you think of when we speak, we're speaking with breath, right? So to speak is to speak an invisible energy that travels to the ears of others, right? So when we speak in breath to others, you can look at the breath as the bird, because it's about speaking a message of the bird that travels as a spirit to the ear of others. And when you break down the word spirit, it literally means breath. So when we're speaking out of our mouths, we're speaking the invisible. We're speaking the spirit. We're speaking a message that is delivered invisibly to the ears and hearts of others. Okay? So that's how we have to really look at it. Now, I also wanted to talk about the green language of Horus and Thoth and Set. Okay? Because Horus is an anagram for hours as the flight of the hour hand of the clock, like the direction of the sun going through the houses of the zodiac wheel, right? Because it's about Horus being the flight of time being recorded for when to plant and when to harvest. So if you look at a clock going clockwise and you look at the sun going clockwise through the houses of the zodiac wheel, and you look at it as a correspondence, that is Horus. Horus is the hour hand going through the zodiac, right? So also when you look at the word Horus and you think of the horizon, you have Horus zone, right? Because Horus is the sun rising at the horizon. So it's the Horus zone. And then you think of the name Thoth, the god Thoth, which is also thought or taught, right? Because Thoth is associated with teaching and writing and learning, both associated with thought and taught, right? And then Set is about the sun setting. And most of the ways that we use the word set has to do with something being down or based or something wrong, like upset, right? Or sun set or set up. So it's about something being down. The sun going down at sunset. Being upset means you're down. A setup. Being set up or tricked, right? So there's some interesting things to think about there. Now we're going to move to slide number 14 with the symbol that looks like an axe or a flagpole, and it says NTR. Now, because I'm talking about these specific gods as moral sciences and spirituality, I want to make mention of this NTR symbol, this Nature symbol. That's one way to pronounce it. You could say Nater or you could say Nature. Those are two ways I've heard it, and I'm okay with either one. But I think it's important to understand why Nature might be the best way to say it. And this is something that Douglas and Mark Passio has talked about, which we can also learn about from Wallace Budge and Albert Churchward. So it's important to note that vowels invoke the spirit, which allows them to be interchangeable. And we have to keep in mind that there are 7 of these vowels. There's A, E, I, O, U, and then W and Y, right? And the consonants are what define what actually is in the physical world. They're dealing with the physical aspects, okay? Very important to pay very close attention to when dealing with consonants that don't have any vowels in between, okay? Because we have to remember that it's about the spirit. It's about the invisible that we can't see. Now, the etymological root of the word natural is the English word nature, which is etymologically derived from the Egyptian word NTR, or nature, meaning God. And this is symbolized hieroglyphically as a symbol stylized as single axe or flag on a pole, especially in the solar cult phase, okay? Representing a power or force in nature, especially an invisible force in nature like wind or gravity.
You have a good
And there's way more to this symbol and word, nature. But what I think is important to keep in mind is that this symbol is a symbol of natural law, especially in looking at it as the two principles of enlightenment, being the self-defense principle and the non-aggression principle. Because as a flagpole, it's pacifistic to wind. It lets the wind do what it wants to it, right? It's non-aggressive. And then as an axe, it becomes a self-defense weapon to be able to fight back with force, right? To morally defend against evil action. So that's a very important symbol to understand when trying to understand the gods of Egypt, especially in the solar phase. So now we're going to move on to slide number 15. Now, since we're talking about the ancient Egyptian gods, I think it's really important to talk about the god Osiris with green language. And Osiris is a really large, important topic on its own. But I just want to point out a few things that I find to be very, very important in regards to green language. And that is, well, first we have to remember that green language is akin to the language of light. And then we have to think in our minds about the seasons in regards to darkness and death, back to light and green and life, okay? So Osiris is an aspect, an archetype of cycles of life, especially dealing with death and resurrection. So as a dark color body, Osiris represents life or nature on earth in its low, cold, death-like state. So when the sun is in its lower position in the day sky during the fall and winter season, right? And simultaneously, he also represents the underworld as a human's spiritual journey into and through the dark that we have to go on in order to have our moral behavior judged to have a chance to be passed into the light and regeneration and raised consciousness. And we have to keep in mind that Osiris is also the god of the afterlife. So we're going to move on to slide number 16. And this is the second slide with the god Osiris on the right, okay? So then as the sun rises, or Osiris rises, this represents resurrection, which is about the rise or rebirth of Horus, because Horus is an attribute of consciousness and life force, okay? But Osiris is also akin to renewal and regeneration, and his body color becomes green, and he rises to become the nature god Ra, okay? And the Egyptian etymology for Osiris is Az-Ra, A-U-S-Ra. So Az meaning the power of or the root of. So Osiris means the power of Ra, meaning rebirth of Ra, which is symbolic of Most High in the solar mythos, especially the later part of the solar mythos. So we have to think of this as an overlap in the solar mythos as well, okay? And that's something I'm not going to get too far into. Now, the principle that makes life come from darkness and apparent death is and was called Asar, who symbolizes the power of renewal, which is Osiris. So Az-Ra represents the process and the growth and the underlying cyclical aspects of the universe, including Earth. Okay, so it's a perpetual cycle of existence and the cycle of life and death, which is symbolized by Ra and Asar, or Osiris. So Ra is the living nature god who descends into death to become Asar, the nature god of the dead, okay? Osiris. So we're going to go to slide number 17 now, that says Solar Mythos, Cycle of Osiris. And this is part of understanding the science of the zodiac, okay? And this is a graph I made of the cycle of Osiris, which is what takes place at the end of the solar mythos, which is pre-Christian and then on up into the present day. So we're all still bound to this solar cult in some fragmented form, okay? And this is a big part of understanding the science of astrotheology and the zodiac, because we're trying to understand the cycles and the archetypal forms to be able to understand the mind, the universal mind, and then also learning when to plant and when to harvest. So this graph is about the cult of Osiris, which again, I'm not going to go too deep into. I'm not going to go too deep into the science of this, but just to at least show the important basics and spiritual aspects of the cycle to understand how green language and the language of the birds can be further understood, because it helps us see the bigger picture, to help us understand this ancient sacred science, because it's something that's going to reveal something so much more about why things are the way they are now in the present day, okay? And it helps us find the dogma and helps us reconnect to our ancient elders who preserved pure forms that we're currently trying to recover and restore. But we have to get through the dogma, okay? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to where the dogma is so we can get back to the pure forms. And the cult of Osiris is a corruption that we have to learn to then be able to see the pure form of the solar mythos, and then on back to the stellar and beyond, okay? So looking at the bottom of the zodiac, we see Osiris as god of the dead and underworld. And this is akin to our spiritual journey through the dark, which is parallel to the sun being at its lowest point in the northern hemisphere during the winter season, okay? And this is where the judgment of moral action takes place in order to be passed towards life or rebirth or resurrection. So it symbolically leads to a new beginning or afterlife. And Osiris rises as Horus, which is also his son. And this is also about the rising of, when you think of birds, they're rising from the south, coming north in the summertime, right? In the northern hemisphere, right? So we also hear their language a lot more too in the summer, spring and summer, because they're rising from the middle, they're rising from the south coming north. So that's very important to pay very close attention to with birds. But we have to understand, we have to stay oriented. This is part of understanding the solar mythos, okay? Because it gets different as we go into the stellar mythos. Now, which comes first? We have to understand that the stellar comes before the solar. So that's very, very important to keep in mind and really pay attention to, okay? But Horus rises or is reborn or resurrected as the savior returning, okay? Returning, the sun is returning. And this is Osiris bringing rejuvenation. Rejuvenation being green as his body color becomes green as representing the living, visible nature, right? So then Osiris rises as Oz-Ra, or Ra, which he then represents growth in the summer solstice, and spiritually fully raised. And since Osiris is green and representing the color of the green visible nature and the summer solstice, he is helping understand the elemental powers akin to being balanced to be able to understand and see and hear green language and the language of the birds. See? Because it's about helping us understand that the mythology can be better unfolded by paying closer attention to any bird attributes and coded words and colors and symbols with respect to consciousness. Because this is all a science of consciousness and our connection to nature. But it's up to us to restore the pure forms. That's part of our spiritual work. And as far as I know, the Osiris myth is not a pure form in the solar mythos because it comes later. But it's important to see how it plays an important part in the evolution and corruption of the solar mythos. But just to finish this cycle, Osiris is met with his brother Set, or Typhon, who he then deposes Osiris, or he cuts him up into 14 pieces and then scatters his body throughout the world. Or you can also look at it like Typhon or Set puts Osiris to sleep, which is the fall of Osiris, where Set takes rule, okay? And at this phase is also about understanding the final things, or ending to a cycle, which is the science of eschatology. But this also has to be understood as the spiritual descent into the underworld. It's where Osiris is the sun at its lowest point at the winter solstice, which is akin to the death of Jesus on the cross. The sun, the sun at its lowest point, right? And it's also important to keep in mind that Isis, the wife of Osiris, is putting between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, Isis is trying to put Osiris back together for the resurrection of Osiris, which is about the resurrection of care, because it's about going in search for truth. So now let's look at the green language of Osiris, which is the Os-Iris. O''S Iris, because Osiris is the judgment, and judgment is the all-seeing eye of the creator, right? The O is the whole of all that is. The WHOLE, whole of all that is. It's the whole iris, or eye of the great judge or creator. So you can look at the zodiac as the circled dot, and the circled dot is the eye of the great judge or the creator, right? So it's the O's, it's the O, the whole iris. So it's all in there, The green language speaks for itself. Now we have to understand that these archetypes, these gods, are anthropomorphized, meaning having human-like features or characteristics or elementals in nature that aren't human. So they're anthropomorphized, typified, humanized elemental powers in nature. That's why they're referred to as netchers. And netchers are elemental, meaning pertaining to the powers of nature. But of course, being anthropomorphized, these netchers, these gods, these elemental powers, they get romanticized and corrupted and literalized, which is what we have to deal with and get past in order to see the pure forms, which is what comes before the solar cult, especially. All right, we're going to move on to slide number 18. And sorry if you guys hear any pounding, hammer pounding. Somebody in my apartment is pounding, and I don't know when they're going to stop. So I'm going to have to just power on through it. So this is a quote by Albert Churchward, who says that the Egyptian ritual is written in the language of animals, and never was it read in the past. Never will it be in the future unless the thinking can be done in the ideographic type of thought. Merely reading the hieroglyphics as phonetics is but a primary lesson in sign language. And an ideograph, if you're not familiar, is a language that uses a token or symbol to describe something without a word or without a sound. Okay? It's a sign language. And Churchward's not talking about hand gestures or the deaf. It's a silent language. It's a silent power of expression. And in a way, it's man's earliest mode of expression, which is something I'd like to further get into in future shows. And I know it's already been mentioned in earlier shows, but I just want to mention it here because I believe that it can really help us better understand the deeper aspects of the language of the birds and green language, because it's about getting to the heart. It's about getting to why these languages even exist. Where do they really come from? Now we're going to go to the final slide, number 19, that says the second degree corresponding to the zodiac. Now, when looking at the second degree tracing board with the two golden brass pillars, there's a waterfall and green grass and trees and corn in the picture below, which is all about regeneration and renewal and rising light, okay? Because it's about the spring to the summertime. It's about the springtime and the summertime. It's about the spring equinox to the summer solstice. It's like I said earlier, with the birds rising from the south coming north, and you can hear them more. You can hear the chirping and the speaking of the birds more at this time, and between spring and summer. So it's about being past the hard, long death of the winter, or low states of consciousness, or representation of the hard shadow work on the self spiritually. So it's about being past the desires of staying or sleeping on the floor of the house, or never beginning the great work. So this is all akin to green language, because it is when we realize our place in nature with the green of regeneration, which can only happen with the help of light, then we can see that green is synonymous with light. And in nature, green is life, and light is life. So it's about balance. And I really do believe that that's what Earth's wobble teaches us. I think that's the lesson that we can gain from the wobble of the Earth, because it's about teaching us the importance of balance within ourselves, because it's about understanding that in order to balance ourselves, we have to go through the dark in order to understand the dark and the light, because we can't really understand light without dark or dark without light. So something else that we can do with this board that I find interesting is, remember I said you can flip it upside down right underneath the first degree tracing board as it aligns to the heart, and the first degree aligns to the mind. So when we align this second degree board upside down underneath the first degree tracing board, we see that the visible nature is right in the middle of both of these boards, right? It's nature's floor reflecting against the spiritual floor of the house, spiritually, right? And under the waterfall now would be above the two brass pillars and middle chamber, because this is the underworld, because it symbolically takes place under the earth as the path of the sun through the darkness, because the light that we are in search for is at the heart of darkness. It's in the heart, because we have to go through the dark to get to the light. It's the middle chamber. And this is also where the student realizes whether he or she has plenty to be able to pass, meaning having enough food or knowledge and understanding to be able to pass on to the afterlife or resurrection or renewal or rebirth. So plenty is the pass word, okay? Because that's what we have to have in order to go on to our new beginning in the cycle, right? Or to raise in consciousness. Because it's about having plenty that we've gathered through the dark. So plenty is the password in nature. Because if you don't have plenty of information, if you don't have plenty of food to get through the dark, cold winter, then you're probably not going to make it to the spring, right? Well, it's the same thing spiritually. If you don't have plenty of knowledge or information that you have gathered through the dark, to the shadow work, then you're not going to rise in consciousness to your higher self, right? You're not going to raise in consciousness to your higher self. So that's what that's about. So plenty is the password. And that's the password in the second degree. And then something else to think about is how the 32nd degree into the 33rd degree of Freemasonry is akin to going through the dark, cold, icy weather of the spiritual journey, going through the dark, doing the shadow work. And that is akin to the 32nd degree, because you're still frozen, you're still cold, right? So it's akin to the seasons, right? But it's also akin to the spiritual journey, because if you're 32 degrees or below, you're below freezing, right? You're still iced, you're still cold. So once we have raised out of the cold, darkness and the shadow work, then we raise into the 33 degrees, which is where water goes from ice to flowing. So we start to flow, and that's what that waterfall is also about, because it's about going from the winter into the spring. It's about going from ice to water. It's about going from darkness to light. So it's a flow from ice. And that's part of understanding the the green language in the degrees of Freemasonry. So there's a lot more to all of this, but I'm really just putting it out on the table so you can really see it, and then you do your work and you can really start to understand what it is that I'm saying here, and you can really start to work from it. Because when you have enough information like this, then you can start to piece more things together and really see the bigger picture for yourself. Okay? So that's probably a good spot to end at for this show, and I'll continue green language and the second degree much further in the next show, and hopefully bring Brandon on so we can do some phonetic word breakdowns. I'd really love that if he could do that. But if he isn't able to come on and do that with me, then I'm still going to do the next show and with the breakdowns and share a lot of the words that I have saved over the years that I'd like to talk about and share. And I know Brandon has tons of words that he'd like to break down and words that I'd like to hear, but we would have a really good time breaking those down if he has a chance. So I'll do what I can to get him on here. And also, I know he has a lot of knowledge regarding these degrees as well. So if he wants to get on here and share anything about the first, second, or third degree, that would be really cool too. But we'll see. Now, before I get off here, I also just want to give some references to what I've covered here in case you're interested. And I know I don't really give enough references on these shows, but I will definitely try to get better. I will get better, but it takes so much work to get to this point, and I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure this all out, and I just have to keep pushing myself because I really want this to be as clear as possible because, the goal is to get past all the dogma. But the main minds that I really studied and was really inspired by are Manly P. Hall, and there's lots of books that I've studied of his that are just amazing and have really helped me get the bigger insight on symbolism and these languages and all the information that we have shared on Freemasonry. Manly P. Hall has been a big part of that, and also Albert Churchward, especially the origin and evolution of religion. And also I've got into this author, Mustafa Gadala, in his book, Egyptian Divinities, which is really, really awesome. And you can learn a lot about Osiris in that book. Also, Douglas Martin's work, especially in regards to his newer presentation, Secret Societies Part 2, and Vincent Bridges, who shares some really interesting insights on the language of the birds. And the book Signs and Symbols was also a really great book that I looked into. There's just so much symbolism out there. And the book of symbols is a really great book. It's a huge book. It's like a Bible of symbols. Pretty amazing book with the hand on the front cover. It's really, really awesome. And then there's also this other book, Ancient Egypt. Pretty big book with lots of awesome images that I think are so important to familiarize ourselves with when trying to understand the mythos, the hero cults, the stellar, lunar, and solar mythos. But there's a lot more that I really can't think of right now, but if I do, I'll share them in the description. So if you're interested in more shows and presentations, or what's going on with other events, you can go to CubbyWhole.com And if you have any questions regarding the topics for these shows, you can email me at cubbyhole@mail.com. And also, any donations that are given are always appreciated, as any of the funds that are donated go directly to the upkeep of the CubbyWhole website. And all you got to do is just hit the donation button at the top of the page, and it's pretty easy to navigate from that point. And thanks again to those who have donated so far. Oh, and also I want to give a shout out to Phil for extending a helping hand for the website, for advice for the website. I really appreciate that. And, anybody who reaches out and really, hears that I'm going through struggles with the website or has any other questions about anything, I really appreciate you reaching out and letting me know what's going on your end, so that way I can, fix things if something's wrong on the website or something's misspelled or whatever. I really appreciate anybody who looks out for me, and, because I'm running this all by myself. So it gets very difficult. I can't be perfect, but I do want the website to always be as readable and easy to navigate as possible. So any help from anybody is always appreciated. And thank you so much. All right, guys, I'm your host, Nate Cap, and thank you for listening. And keep in mind to do no harm, defend truth, and keep transcending dogma.
All right, another amazing episode. You're an absolute legend if you made it this far. Again, that's another one of those where I'm gonna have to go back, listen to, sit down, get the slides on my phone, make sure I'm getting all of the What is going on back there? Making sure I'm getting all of the knowledge that I possibly can, and making sure that I'm, spending time and paying attention to get this knowledge. I really need to. Yeah, I'm gonna need to sit down and watch that one with the slides again. I haven't watched these episodes with the slides in quite a long time. It's been like 2-3 years since I've watched these episodes with the slides. So again, I highly recommend that you watch these with the slides and the photos. It just helps so much. It adds another layer to the understanding. So, like I said, you're a legend if you made it this far. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and watching and encouraging me to record, especially with Fallout, because the more I play Fallout, just the more I enjoy it. I don't know. I'm a weirdo. Also, don't forget, you can use code BeagleEyeVision at w.gg. Get yourself 10% off your entire purchase at w.gg. Get yourself some clean, sugar-free game fuel. It's delicious. I can't wait to order some more. But although should be moving hopefully here soon, so gonna have to start all over. But anyways, thank you again if you made it this far. Stay tuned and stay golden.